All right, we've got 40 people in here. Let's get going. So welcome everyone. I'm Kai Nagata. Thank you for joining our workshop today with Alexandra Woodsworth and Dave Mills from Dogwood. They're both going to lend some of their expertise. Hi, Alexandra. Hi, Dave. Well, I won't make you unmute if you got to mute and unmute, but thank you to Alexandra and Dave for being here, and thank you to Jamie, who is currently on your screen as a teal dogwood flower, and she's going to be our studio director running the Zoom platform today. So we called this event Cut Carbon, Save Money, Build Community, and today we're going to be talking about decisions close to home, decisions that we can control, and how these connect to the much bigger challenge of both cutting the extraction and the consumption of fossil fuels in our province. At this hour, Vancouver police are surrounding Indigenous youth who are blockading a key economic choke point in the city of Vancouver at the port, and they're demanding the release of Stacy Gallagher. Stacy Gallagher is an Indigenous man who was arrested and charged, convicted yesterday to 90 days in jail for leading peaceful prayer outside of the Trans Mountain Tank Farm. And we need to keep both of these things in our mind at once today. So there's a need for solidarity with frontline resistance to oil and gas expansion, especially led by Indigenous people, Indigenous youth. And at the same time, we need to be thinking about systemic change in our colonial institutions that govern our lives. And quite frankly, as all of you know, these higher levels of government are moving in the wrong direction, even as the climate crisis gets worse. So it's going to take a lot of work to build up a grassroots movement that is powerful enough to bend that curve in the right direction. Along the way, we believe it's possible to help you save money, make your living space where you're stuck because of COVID more comfortable, and protect your family's health. And the reason for that is so that all of us have more energy and more capacity to help our neighbors, to stand in solidarity with our allies and with Indigenous people in BC, and to participate in our democracy more broadly. So we're calling this event, this is the first in our Decarbonize BC webinar series, and we have some really exciting guests, including one that just confirmed 5 minutes before we jumped on. So I'm really excited to tell you about those upcoming workshops near the end of the program. And of course, as always, if you need to go take care of life or you have friends who couldn't make it today, we're going to be sending out the webinar recording afterwards, along with some cool new worksheets that we've created that I think will help you think through and plan your own decarbonization journey. So watch for that in your inbox after today's workshop. We all, I think, want a life that is more free from the expense and the health effects and the environmental impacts of fossil fuels. And we want that freedom for all people in BC. So that's what this workshop series is about. Today, I'm speaking to you from the territories of the Gitxsan people in northern BC on land that was occupied by settlers in 1866 in the middle of a gold rush. So the town site of Hazelton and the farmland up the valley where I live was quite literally staked out and claimed over the objections of the Gitxsan chiefs. And those settlers were backed by the military force of the British Crown, who very literally sent gunboats to burn the villages of communities that resisted this takeover of their land. So one of my goals amid all of this is to return as much of that land as possible to the authority and control of the Gitxsan house groups in my lifetime. And I'll pass it over to Alexandra and Dave to talk a little bit more about where in the province you're coming from.
Thanks, Kai. Hi, everyone. I am calling into you today from Huesam, otherwise known as Roberts Creek on the Sunshine Coast, the territory of the Shisha and Squamish peoples. And the dozens of villages up and down the coast here used to refer to themselves as one big smoke, referring to their unified peoples, until missionaries occupied these lands. And smallpox reduced the thousands and thousands of Shisha by about 90% to just 167 people who remained, who were driven from their ancestral homes to a single site in what we now know as Sechelt. Today, the nation is about 1,000 or so community members strong, and it described itself as self-governing. It's the only nation in BC with the governance model that gives it the same status as a municipality under federal and provincial law. I'm a settler on these lands for the past 5 years, and I'm the fourth generation of my family who has lived here on the coast. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Alexandra and Kai, and hello, everybody. I'm calling in today from unceded Comox territory. I live in what's called the village of Union Bay, Terry Glavin wrote a fascinating piece about Union Bay in Maclean's magazine a couple months back. I really encourage you all to pick it up and take a read, because Union Bay sits in between two great language families, Kwakwaka'wakw and Salish, and is a former home of the Pentlatch people. And the Pentlatch people, with the exception of their ancestral DNA, which is in Comox people today, the Pentlatch people are extinct as a nation. Yet, if I look out my window, I can see the evidence of their incredible marine architecture work. They operated the largest fish trap complex on the west coast, on the Puntledge River. There are extensive middens and shellfish gardens all along the coastline. And right now, as housing developments are going in my area, and the trees are being cleared, the remains of Pentlatch people are being unearthed as new housing is built. So when I think about decolonization, I think about the process of colonization that's ongoing right now, and how the question of land and who controls it is so central to that. And I guess that's what I'll say for now. Back to you, Kai.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, Alexandra. I'm seeing a number of familiar faces or names in the participants. It's great to have the little chance we do to connect, and I'm curious, for those of us who haven't met, where you're coming from in the province. So we're going to put up a little survey, and we'll leave that up here in the Zoom window for a few minutes, just to give us a sense of where you're joining from. And later on, we'll give you a chance to connect with other folks in your region who are working around these issues in your part of the province. So we are 1 year into this pandemic, and I think it's important to take a clear-eyed look at where we're at. Alexandra, you've been active in the climate movement internationally and here in BC for longer than I have. I think at least 15 years. And can you give us a sense of where we're at, just big picture, in the climate emergency?
Yeah, well, I can start with my positive take, which doesn't generally last too long. But yeah, as you mentioned, the kind of, the 15 years element, doing it a long time. And when I used to say in my younger days, and words like we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground, or the era of oil is ending, I was laughed out of town halls. It was a really hard thing to go out and say these kinds of ideas. They were big ideas. They were hard, and they were hard to have conversations about. And now these are in the they're mainstream. They're in the mouths of politicians and global energy forecasters, governments, even oil companies are knowing that this transition is happening. They're setting targets. Every party needs a climate plan, however awful or mediocre it may be. But it is happening, right? We acknowledge this, and this is the victory. We need to celebrate these things because it's the work of movements for a long time now that we are making progress. But as we all know, that's why we're here today, it is so slow. It is too slow for science, for justice, for survival. And the way I'm seeing it today, the kind of biggest problem of all, and the biggest thing we're wrestling with, is that governments are really talking out of both sides of their mouth and getting away with it, in the sense that they're putting up press releases every week announcing some new incentive, some new investment. They're getting kudos for this, while at the same time they're pushing ahead with massive fossil fuel extraction that is still responsible for the lion's share of our emissions, and that really cancels out, the kind of savings that we're seeing in the good column, where they're getting all this praise. So, a lot of us, it's been an amazing and fascinating and difficult year in terms of COVID. And, from the climate emergency perspective and the emissions, we have seen historic drops, but those are predicted by most agencies to be temporary. And actually the concentrations of emissions of CO2 in the atmosphere still went up in 2020. Oil and gas production emissions related were up, December 2020 against 2019. So, as we were all home, as planes were grounded and cars were in the driveway, those kinds of emissions were going down, but industry really carried on. And I think everyone's pretty clear that the trajectory is still going in the wrong direction despite COVID. In terms of, we saw huge turmoil in the oil markets, particularly in the beginning of the pandemic. We saw the first time in history that oil prices went below zero, when literally they couldn't give it away. It's been a tumultuous time in the markets, but there are, forecasters really talking about lasting impacts, and that what COVID is doing is going to hasten a transition that we've just been talking about, that we know is coming, and it's going to make it come faster. So how are governments responding? One would hope they'd be responding with, massive, bold decarbonization projects, but in terms of the kind of public money that is still going to traditional industries and oil and gas, it is going up. So on the federal level, since the pandemic began, we've seen a 200% jump in subsidies going to the fossil fuel sector. A lot of that is, essentially supporting them to pay to clean up their own messes, or potentially to reduce their carbon intensity, but ultimately it's public dollars going to oil companies who should be paying for that kind of stuff out of their profits, rather than out of the pockets of taxpayers, and that money that could be going directly to clean energy. And on the provincial side, I'm just going to pop back to my Zoom notes here. Yeah. We spend $1 billion a year on subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, and that's twice as much as we spend on climate change, and 4 times what we get back in terms of money to the province. And again, this number is going up. It's gone up under, under the NDP government as compared to the Liberal government. So these are, wholesale going in the wrong direction. And then in terms of these kind of mega projects that we've all been, that are the pointy end, and what we really focus on often when we're talking about oil and gas emissions, all 3 of the big projects in BC, Trans Mountain, Coastal GasLink, and Site C, were all classified as essential work during the pandemic. Somehow, by gravity-defying logic is the way it seems to me. But they all use the pandemic. They push forward hard, particularly outside the Lower Mainland, along the routes for Trans Mountain, from kind of the border with Alberta right down to Hope, Coquihalla. In the places where fewer people were seeing it, there has been a lot of activity, and there's been a lot of construction this year. So, Kai's framing, we're going the wrong direction here. And yeah, to me, unfortunately, politicians, Trudeau being a classic example, has really successfully disconnected climate action from fossil fuel investment. He runs on one and he calls the other economic development or pandemic recovery. And we're definitely seeing that here in BC too. So we have a huge job to do, us in our movement and in our communities, to make sure that the kind of kudos that politicians get for climate action are matched with political cost for buying, funding, and propping up the fossil fuel industry in the 8 years left we've got to tackle climate change in a meaningful way, and to build the kind of power we need to convince the government to cut off big oil and get serious about decarbonizing. And that's a tough position to be in, to see these projects, powering through in this last year, and to see that we have not managed to stop them yet. And that is why, as we go about building up our power, we're here today to also talk about working closer to home to tackle the kind of things that are within our control, within our homes and communities, and things that are within our power as we build up our bigger power. Over to you, Kai.
All right. Thank you, Alexandra, for that sobering, but I think clear-eyed assessment of just where we're at as a movement and as an organization. And I think we owe it to ourselves and to our supporters and allies not to delude ourselves that our strategies are working if they're not, and to continue to try new things when our approaches are failing. I did want to share the results of the first little survey just to get a sense of who's in the room. Thank you, Jamie. So we're seeing exactly equal neck and neck representation from Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland, but also a healthy number of folks from the Southern Interior, from the Skeena, from Kootenays, and also I noticed a couple of folks in the chat from the Gulf Islands, who perhaps we might erroneously lump in with Vancouver Island, but thank you for speaking up for yourselves as the Gulf Islands. So it's good to see folks from across the province. Dave, I wanted to get a sense from you. You're a longtime organizer with Dogwood and before that, and I know you've got an ear to the ground in all of these communities around BC. And I wanted to ask you from more of a local perspective, how you would answer that question of where we're at right now, 1 year into the pandemic.
I'm taking a real strong sense of optimism out of this past year with me into our work. I know the pandemic broke sort of the backbone of organizing, which is those face-to-face conversations and the face-to-face gatherings. Yet people have been able to draw inspiration from each other's stories by connecting with each other online. And in many cases, we've been able to communicate further afield and more often with folks that we wouldn't normally visit in person. And I think looking at the road ahead of us, for the first time, we have sort of all three ingredients that we need to tackle the climate crisis on the table. And I think that's new. For the first time, like, we have a universal price on carbon that applies to all people, though governments do manage to shelter corporations with subsidies, yet the market forces are on the table for us to use. We also have universally applied policy, and we have, you know, like the carbon tax and the clean fuel standards will apply to all Canadians. And we also see that Canadians are increasingly taking responsibility. See a rapid uptake in EVs, a lot of people switching to heat pumps. And I think that's a new standard to build on. And like I said, it's the first time those three things have all existed at the same time. And so for me personally, connecting with people who have been at the forefront, early adopters who have managed to decarbonize our lives and show people that there's a different path forward, that is a great comfort. And the more of those people we can collect together, the greater chance we have to bend this curve. So though I am very clear-eyed about the road ahead, you know, 1 in 3 molecules of carbon were put up in the atmosphere by us. And we've got to not only stop doing that, we've got to figure out how to claw a bunch of it back. And it's a race against time. Yet people show remarkable capacity to find another gear in the home stretch. And so as we look at the next 5 years, you know, we know the leadership has failed us, but we can also see people responding in their own ways and pulling down the few tools they have and amplifying them. And when people start to do that, it's contagious. For the past year, I've been privileged to work with those early adopters in the Cowichan Valley and the Okanagan and the Kootenays, and they've had a tremendous influence on me. It's like I can't show up to a meeting with people who are already ahead of the curve, you know, in my old clunky SUV. Those are tangible impacts that people have on each other, and that type of contagion that sort of has brought us into this crisis where we think oil and gas is ubiquitous in our lives and we're all safer driving SUVs and there's no possible way to change our economy. When that starts to reverse, that type of contagion has the same effect. You see solar panels on your neighbor's roof and you think, I could do that too. And you notice the air is cleaner around your school as people drop their kids off in EVs instead of Suburbans, and that has an impact. So I'm drawing optimism from all those scenarios while sticking with the scientific assessment of where we're really at.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, it's challenging. We have to keep both those things in our heads at once. I'll say that that psychological shift is real. I think COVID has really helped us think about energy at a micro level. And my hope is, I don't know if this is true yet, but my hope is that by thinking about energy and energy systems at a super tangible local scale, that we can build the kind of political pushback to governments that are taking us in the wrong direction at a much larger scale. Like in a very simple sense, just understanding what a watt of energy is helps you understand the scale of the Site C dam. And understanding how much gas is burned in your home in a given year gives you a sense of the scale of the fracking operations proposed in the Northeast. And I think that there's a real energy literacy gap that's deliberate, that is fostered by industry and government. And some of the trends that you're describing, where people are starting to take control over those things at a more micro level, I hope help to build a political constituency of people who can call BS on industry and can push back on government. So I'll just say, working from home this year personally has forced me to think about extremely mundane things that I used to ignore. Because we're stuck at home, I have this draft. So when I'm on my computer, like the hairs on the back of one hand would go up because I had this cold air draft, and I would just ignore it. I would ignore it and just like keep typing. And then at a certain point, several months in, I was just like, this is driving me crazy. And I stopped at the hardware store and got like $100 worth of insulation. I'm a renter, so I can't do a big reno, but I got some like expanding foam and some, film to cover the windows that don't open. And this sounds ridiculous and very small scale, but not only has it paid for itself, in the first winter up north, but it's just allowing me to focus on bigger things instead of like, being cold or wondering how much I'm going to spend on heating this winter. So that's my plug for insulation. Very sexy, I know. Not as cool as heat pumps or other technology, but yeah, it can make a big difference. And it's the kind of thing that we need to think about on a much larger scale as we retrofit all of the public buildings and office buildings around BC to stop using so much fracked gas to heat our air that we walk around in. Curious about personal reflections from both of you. I know Alexandra, you've recently undertaken a big project close to home. Do you want to tell folks about that?
Yeah, so I own my own home, and we built it so a year and a half ago. So we went through like the whole gamut of decisions about, what kind of house to build given a tight budget. And we really wrestled with choices about where to spend what money we could spend for kind of emission savings projects. And we couldn't do everything we wanted to do. We don't have solar panels yet. We hope to one day. But what we ended up prioritizing was insulation and windows. So that was like going beyond, what's in the code. And the big ticket item was the high efficiency heat pump. And I knew nothing about any of these things. Like, I'm a climate activist from way back, but I definitely didn't know like the ins and outs of how a house gets heated. And I had to learn a lot of all these kinds of things, like our values. Again, very, very not sexy. And in particular, how does a heat pump work when I was trying to decide whether we should go for this. And I had some kind of lots of interesting conversations with people who, had the good, the bad, and the ugly, particularly based on older models. And then some folks kind of from the newer realm saying, no, heat pumps are not your grandpa's or your dad's heat pump. So what our system kind of looks like from the inside of our house is a lot like a traditional forced air furnace. Ducts run through our house, warm air comes out of the vents. It feels way less blowy, if that's a word, compared to the house I grew up in with a traditional forced air furnace. And it's quieter most of the time, and then that more traditional system. But the way it works, and it's essentially magic to me, but from my reading, the way it works is that we've got the furnace in our basement, and it's hooked up to the fan unit outside with my little guy standing next to it there, through an air exchanger, which basically extracts heat from the outside air using a condenser and coolant, basically like a fridge in reverse. So even in cold temperatures, there is residual heat in the outside air that this air exchanging unit can extract. And that's, the magic of physics. It just does that. It just works. But at a certain temperature, obviously that doesn't work anymore. And for us, that seems to be around 0. And that's when a backup system kicks in that, that is generating the heat through electricity alone, rather than through the differential between the air temperatures inside and outside the house. So that's like the specs, but it's not what I noticed. I noticed that it keeps us warm in the winter. It works as an air conditioner in the summer, which is not a huge factor given where we live, but it's a big bonus if we did want to keep our windows closed during wildfire season, for example. And it has extra air filtration as well. So our indoor air is cleaner, both in terms of like particulates coming in from outside and in terms of not having the toxins from a gas furnace. When we were making these decisions, what really sold me was obviously the carbon impacts. I'll talk about that in a second, but also the long-term operating costs versus other forms of electric heating like baseboards. And so far that's paying off. Our overall energy costs are a lot lower than in our previous similar sized house when we were heating with fossil fuels. And yeah, with this one, you know, that basically the emissions from a heat pump are roughly half, maybe 40% of a gas furnace. So with this one big item, we've cut a big chunk of our family's carbon footprint down. And what we're here talking about today is how to find ways to support as many people as, you know, in the province to do the same. Bigger picture, buildings are responsible. We talk about some of the other sources of emissions, but they are responsible for a big chunk of our carbon emissions, something in the range of 20%. And residential buildings are pumping out, 4.5 million tons of CO2 a year from gas right now. So we need to get off gas in buildings and get electricity on board, across the board as fast as we can. The technology is here, it works. It's convenient. It doesn't involve lifestyle changes or sacrifices in some other area, that do on, avoiding flights or biking instead of driving, all these kinds of things. So it's, it really is practical, and it's about the money, really. Where does the money come from for what are big, costly upfront upgrades? We've got retrofit incentives out there right now, and that covers a big chunk if you're looking at doing a renovation, especially in certain municipalities that are offering these top-ups. There are something called PACE loans that you'll have heard about from us before, hopefully coming soon to BC, which are another way to kind of pay off some of these upgrades over the longer term and offer the peace of mind that if you sell, you can pass the loan on with a house. But I always have to come back to kind of think about who can afford these upfront costs, even with the incentives. Who has the choice to direct what extra cash they may have to retrofits rather than other needs in their homes or in their lives. For renters, so for apartments, for condos, for commercial and public buildings, these are decisions that are being made by developers and by governments. So for me, I always remember that ultimately, whether it's incentives or bigger buildings or PACE loans, municipal and provincial policy and choices and priorities and how public money is spent are still going to be really important drivers of how quickly and how comprehensively we'll be able to get gas out of our buildings. And for me in my life, that looks like being really grateful for the circumstances that let me have cleaner air and a lower carbon home, but really keeping my eye on the prize of the kind of large scale decarbonization action that will allow that to be a reality for everyone in the province. And in terms of barriers, we also have to not forget about the vested interests of our old friends, big oil and gas, who are aggressively lobbying to keep us hooked on fossil fuels in the home, from big budget advertising campaigns, convincing the government to offer incentives to switch to a more efficient gas furnace, that's still in the same category of these incentives. A big focus on, efficiency and conservation rather than fuel switching, like right down to funding energy advisors in municipalities to advise people on how to keep their homes. And a whole bunch of other kind of dirty tricks that are straight out of Big Tobacco's playbook. And we've got upcoming webinars on all of these things, the gas industry's tricks, retrofits, PACE. So Kai's going to tell you a little bit more about those towards the end of the session. But that was kind of like a lightning tour, and there will be plenty of opportunities over the next month, 6 weeks to do deep dives on all of those things.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alexandra. And I just got confirmation from Rebecca Lieber before this call. She's an investigative reporter at Mother Jones in Washington, D.C., and she's uncovered many of the ways that gas companies have used, as Alexandra said, the tobacco industry playbook, both to downplay the health effects, suppress medical research around burning gas indoors, and funded astroturf groups in municipalities all over the continent to fight regulation around indoor gas burning in homes. So we'll have a deep dive with an investigative reporter coming up in a couple of weeks, which I'm excited about, and I hope you can join us for. Jamie, I'm going to ask you to put the next survey up. This is not about judging people. We're just trying to get a sense of how many of our homes burn natural gas. And that means getting a utility either from Fortis or Pacific Northern Gas And that'll just give us a sense of where the low-hanging fruit is in our communities in terms of both making your own family healthier, but also freeing yourself from the cost and the downsides of fracked gas. Dave, I wanted to come back to you and just get your sense of like personal reflections, just with the sort of four walls of your home and your neighborhood around the Comox Valley. What have you been working on?
Most British Columbians, or your average British Columbian, is carrying 13 tons of carbon weight with them as they move through the world. And for our family, we live rurally. So our trips into town account for most of our carbon emissions. We're a 2-car family, so we're probably pretty close to the British Columbian average. And when we're looking at options for decarbonizing our lives, you know, the first thought we had honestly was, well, why don't we just move into town? If our son is going to school there and my partner's working in town, it makes a lot of sense to just drop one of those cars and move into town. But as many of you know, like, the housing market is not a stable entity in British Columbia. So it's not really easy anymore to just sort of sell your home and move, particularly in the Comox Valley, where the prices have skyrocketed and the availability has dropped. So that just started kind of like almost an argument, like, how do we do this? How do we afford to decarbonize our vehicles? When we're considering all these options that have influenced so much of our decision making over time. My partner is rightly concerned about safety. We have to drive on a highway every day. And that was the big thing that influenced our decision when we originally decided to purchase a small SUV. You know, we were driving on the Coquihalla every month, and you'd see these wrecks on the side of the road, and you're like, man, I don't want that to be me. I don't want my family to ever be in that situation. So we were really nervous about diving into an electric car, and it's also not particularly affordable. And likewise, where we live in rural communities, like many folks across BC, we don't really have public transit to speak of. There's a bus that goes by 3 times a day, and it doesn't really go to where you need it to go. So, I mean, that fact alone is one of the reasons why Dogwood got on board to support the Let's Ride campaign, which is advocating for rural bus service across BC, something that's sorely missing and would definitely have influenced our decision to get rid of a car if that option was available to us. What we ended up doing was selling our old car and getting a hybrid. It was what we could afford at the time. The impact on that has been a 30% reduction in our household emissions. And it's interesting, like, now we actually have a target. Just having that conversation and making that decision sort of forced us to do some household calculations, like where are our emissions coming from? It was obvious most of them were from transportation, but then we're looking at our gas burning cooktop, and we're like, well, could that go as well? And you know, the research that Kai has alluded to around the health impacts on gas burning in the house, like, that stuff's starting to come out, and it's pretty scary. When you sit down and read it, you're like, yeah, it's going to be a really good idea to get the gas stove out of our house. So having the conversation about decarbonization, it just sort of led to the question of, like, well, how do we actually get into this situation? Like, what was it that influenced us to purchase an SUV? You know, it was that safety concern. And what was it that influenced us to purchase a gas cooktop? It was like, well, it was watching all those cooking shows and, you know, seeing the hot flame and flash and sear on the stove. You know, it was an attractive thing. We didn't really even think about the health impacts or the carbon impacts. It's just a powerful reminder that issues of safety and peer influence, like, they have big impacts on our decision making, which is why when we look about getting gas out of people's homes, that's going to work in our favor. When people start to understand how toxic it is to burn with gas and heat with gas, those are going to be powerful motivators. So with our own family, we're planning to be zero emissions completely by 2025, and we'll get there by phasing out our gas burning vehicles and getting rid of the gas stove in our house. Right now we heat with electric and wood, so we're okay there, and we've done all the retrofits we can afford around windows and insulation. So yeah, that's where we're at right now.
Thanks for those reflections, Dave. And as I mentioned, I'm in northern BC, so I'm next door to our family farm, and I've found myself, backing 1,200 pounds of animal feed through a completely iced over barnyard in my pickup truck, or trying to unload, 1,000-pound round bales of hay. And I'm thinking, like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to grow food for the valley here and for our neighbors without pickup trucks and tractors and fossil fuels? And the reality is that I don't have a solution for that right now. We're going to have to rethink our supply chains. We're going to have to rethink how we farm, really, in order to get away from those emissions. But in the meantime, there's a whole bunch of tasks that I do that I just need to move myself and some tools, like checking fence line, or looking for animals, or doing repairs. Like, I can quite literally strap tools on the back of a bike. And so that's what I've invested in this year. This has been my pandemic project. Is I just ordered a big cargo bike with an electric assist so that I can displace some of those short haul vehicle trips around the valley, and prove to myself and hopefully to others that living in a rural setting and a northern setting isn't necessarily an obstacle to running large parts of your life carbon free. So that's been fun, and it's been very encouraging to see the community of folks who are sort of thinking through these things in the early stages. I do want to talk about how we can scale this up, because so far we're talking about sort of individual changes in our lives, and at the same time, there's a whole bunch of low-hanging fruit in our municipalities. I've seen the statistic that about 50% of the carbon burned in BC happens in our cities, and yet our municipalities have very little power to set regulations or constraints around those kinds of economic activity. And so that's what our local power teams are starting to tackle at the sort of next level up from households and neighborhoods, looking at opportunities municipally. And I wanted to turn it over to both you, Dave and Alexandra, to talk about what the local power teams are up to right now, and what some of those opportunities are as we look around BC at the decarbonization challenge.
I can start, Kai. You're correct. 50% of emissions do originate in our urban environments, but yet our city councilors, who are the folks who are out there declaring climate emergencies and the most vocal advocates for good climate policy, they have the fewest tools in their toolbox. The only thing our municipal leaders can use are things like building codes and incentives. So what local power teams have been doing recently is working with local elected officials, meeting them where they're at, and hearing about the things that they would like to have in order to start reducing those emissions from the built environment. And we're hearing from city councilors near universal support for PACE. If PACE is new to you, it's an amazing climate action financing tool which takes a lot of the financial and tax burden off municipalities. Right now, many of us are fortunate to be able to access like a grant from the provincial government, and many municipalities are topping up sort of heat pump grants with a couple $1,000s here and there. That's happening in Courtenay and on the North Shore. But having a PACE program allows that financing to come in at scale, so it's accessible and affordable for all people. And another tool that municipal councillors are looking for is the ability to regulate buildings, essentially. So Vancouver, with its charter, can ban hookups of natural gas with new builds, but that can't happen here in Courtenay. So having regulations that allow councillors to pass laws that ban gas in new builds and to benchmark household emissions, those are just some of the other things that they're asking for us to do. So if we're looking towards the next elections in 2022, that partnership with the people who are actually leading the fight to decarbonize here in BC, that's a critical role for local power teams. And right now we're meeting councillors in the South Island, in Duncan, in Nanaimo, in Comox Valley, in Kelowna, and Kamloops. So there's a broad range of activity going on right now.
Alexandra, can you talk a little bit about the opportunities you see at that level between the sort of households, you know, PACE loans, heat pumps, retrofits, and provincial policy? Like, what's the bridge there? What are some of the projects that we could be organizing around?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we have been thinking about this is getting public money flowing in the right direction. So, we've talked a lot about subsidies at the federal and provincial level, but when you start looking at, slightly, bigger than a household level project, for example, like a school or a hospital, those are publicly funded too. Sometimes there are partnerships, for example, for a school between like the district and the province and, fundraising, all this kind of thing. But there are large chunks of public money going into these projects where I'd love to see more teams and more local people organizing to make sure that the school that their kids are going to go to, where they have such a vested interest. And, again, this is pointing back to Dave's point of like, once people understand those kind of impacts, no one wants their kid in a school with a gas boiler, all day for the next 5-12 years of their lives. So seeing communities come together to make sure that publicly funded projects that are in their neighborhoods, in their communities are, don't have gas in them. Like, that seems like a real natural fit. I think a lot of our people are really excited about that kind of thing. We've got an example right now in Kamloops, I believe, of a school that's just received kind of, the green light for these kinds of funding projects. So I think for me, it helps me to think about linking up from those lower, home personal levels to the big picture, the big challenge that we need to do to get, literally just flip the flow of public money, flip that graph that I showed earlier in the right direction rather than the wrong direction.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's some great examples of that type of work that local power teams are undertaking. For example, in Kelowna, we've got a group of people who are banding together to promote a heat pump pilot. So they're recruiting 30 people this year to convert their gas furnaces to heat pumps, and they've got a goal of expanding that to 500 next year, and they've reached out to local contractors for pricing support. And likewise, down in Duncan, our local power team has approached the city with plans they drew up themselves that examine both the fire hall and the public works building. They're showing them the solar energy potential from the rooftops and the cost savings over the next 20 years. And in an interesting scenario in Courtenay, I didn't really realize this until I looked into it, but our public sector organizations, which are our universities and our schools and our hospitals, all these buildings that are supported in institutions that are supported by public money, they're all actually required under law to be carbon neutral. Well, how do they get there? Like, do they do that by pulling their gas heating systems out and converting to clean renewable energy? Well, no, they get there by using offset credits. And in 2022, next year, the price of carbon is going to double to $50 a ton. So every year, the tuition dollars and your tax dollars that go into paying for our healthcare, like, that money actually gets redirected into BC's carbon market. And it's at North Island College, it's a significant amount of money. There'll be $150,000 that'll be on the table, and instead of just dumping it into the carbon market, we're coming up with a plan for them to show them how they could eliminate emissions completely from the campus with the same amount of money. So lots of interesting projects on the ground that are starting up, and we'd like to see more of those in towns across BC.
Great. So if you're interested in this kind of action in your region of BC, I want to put up the third polling question, which is just whether you're interested in joining a local power team in your part of BC, and we'll leave that up for a little bit. And if you do answer yes or maybe, we can get in touch and let you know, if you're not already a member of one of those teams, what your next opportunity is to plug in at the local level. So we need to get to the Q&A. These hour-long lunchtime sessions always go a little quicker than you expect. Alexandra and Dave, are you okay to stay an extra couple of minutes if the Q&A is lively and we run over? Okay. And if we don't get to anything, we're also available afterwards to answer individual questions by email. So once you've answered the poll question about joining a local power team, there is a Q&A button that you can use to drop questions, and we've seen some really good questions in the chat. If you don't mind posting those in the Q&A, then you can upvote and downvote, or I think you just upvote different questions, so we make sure that the really popular and salient and relevant ones get answered today. And so, yeah, I wanted to start to pivot towards some of your questions and just get a sense from everybody really where your focus is this year, and where we can help, either help you think through that decarbonization challenge at the household level, or plug you in to teams that are scaling that up to the municipal or the local level. So we've got a couple of questions already in the Q&A, and I'd like to just get started. So somebody in Esquimalt has asked us if you can differentiate between heating and stove natural gas use. Dave or Alexandra, do you want to tackle the difference, if any, between burning gas to cook food and burning gas to heat air in your home?
I can start with the cooktop side, and then I'll pass it to Alexandra for the heating side. I think when you turn on your stove in your kitchen, say you've got 2 burners going plus the oven, the only thing that's venting that is your fan and a small stack behind the stove. So your ventilation for your kitchen cooktop is actually quite minimal. So, you know, if you had to pick the thing to do next week, I would say pick your gas stove, because it's going to have the biggest impact on your air quality. Whereas your furnace comes with a bit more built-in venting and is covered by building code regulations, which are more stringent. So if I had to pick next week which one to pull out, I would pull out my kitchen stove.
I could just add that, yeah, there's kind of the 3 things, right? There's cooking, heating, and then there's hot water as well, being another source. You know, a lot of people have gas-fired hot water heating. And we really, yeah, that was a tough one for us to figure out, because the way the heat pump works, the air source heat pump for space heating in the home, it felt more realistic. We're a little further ahead. It's an easier thing to do, to switch to a heat pump for air source heating where we live than for hot water heating. So that's just kind of I don't know, I feel like we're still wrestling a little more with that switch. Obviously you can get electric fired, you know, home heating, and that works too, but it doesn't have the same efficiencies of a heat pump. So that was just like one of those many choice points that we kind of tried to figure out when we were trying to build. But in terms of the health impacts, yeah, Dave, you kind of summarized it well. I would definitely be more worried about like where I stand for an hour every evening versus something tucked away in my basement.
Yeah.
And way more expensive, right, to retrofit that level of item.
Yeah, again, I know this can be a little overwhelming if you're coming to this cold, and the goal is not perfection, and it's not to be carbon saints overnight. The goal is to make a realistic plan over the next years to cut as much fossil fuel out of our lives as we can, and out of our province's overall emissions profile. And so that means tackling the things that make sense first, and sometimes we're going to need to build towards things that are going to cost more or are at a larger scale. So we've had a couple questions in the chat about how to decarbonize a condo building or an apartment building, and we've also got a related question from Owen Finn in the Q&A about the PACE program And Owen's asking, what are the policies of the different BC parties around passing legislation to enable municipalities to bring in PACE loans? I'll just say that we're going to have a standalone webinar all about climate action financing and about PACE, and we'll talk about that with a policy expert. But if you could give a quick overview, Dave, just of where the parties are at on PACE loans and how this could help us to move beyond just the individual household level.
Great question. All the parties support PACE. They had it in their election campaign, so I don't really think political support is the issue with PACE. And for those of you who don't know, the government has gone out to a private consultant to develop a roadmap for PACE, and that consultant's report is due at the end of the month. So we should hear an indication from the BC government about PACE and how quickly they're willing to move on it. And it'll be a great opportunity for all of us to get together and provide a little nudge, because it is something that has had transformative impacts down in the States, where it's been in play for, well, since the mid-90s. Not only around emissions and decarbonization, but also just about local economic development. If we think about how much money that we spend on fossil fuel heat and fossil fuel gas, if you go through a PACE financing retrofit and you become an energy generator or a consumer of local power, you're really fueling the circular economy. You're keeping much more money in the economy, which creates a bunch more jobs. So transformative program, and we'll have the opportunity to, as Kai said, get a bit more of a deep dive into it, and also give our political representatives a nudge when the PACE roadmap report is released.
Great, thanks, Dave. We have a question from Kirby. Hey, Kirby. I'm planning on building a house in the near future. Is there a resource anyone can recommend for like best practices for house construction in terms of energy efficiency, low energy use, what materials to use, heating systems? So I'll answer the first part of that by saying, after this webinar, in a couple of hours, we'll send you it's kind of like a snakes and ladders game, or like a flow chart, where you can find all of the different rebates and incentives and some information resources as well about these different technologies, both on the transportation side and on the home heating side. So we'll mail that out to you if you RSVP to this event in a couple of hours. But starting with a new home with construction sometimes is more challenging. A lot of those retrofit incentives are aimed at existing homes. So Dave or Alexandra, if you wanted to highlight anything you found in your own home building journey, Alexandra, or any resources or organizations we can point people to.
Yeah, I found it surprisingly hard, actually. I wish there was like a perfect resource like that aimed at BC, like aimed at our energy mix here and our solar and the conditions we live in here in BC. And I found like I had to kind of pull from things that were coming from companies, from stuff that was really aimed at like a full passive house, which wasn't what I was able to do with the project I was doing. So my short answer is it's harder than you might think. There are plenty of resources, and there are plenty of people who've like blogged their journey of doing it here in BC. It's something I could kind of point a few links in the follow-up emails to some top ones. But I think with these kind of things, it is always tricky, because you do find those, but they're targeted at other locations. And I haven't seen the perfect one for BC, but I did this 2 years ago. So let's hope someone's pulled it together in the meantime.
Yeah, Kirby, let's follow up. We'll be in touch. I'll send you the handout. Everyone will get that after this, and then we'll go from there. Because yeah, really want to see more folks, especially community leaders and people who are have big groups of friends. We need more people who are thinking through these things and talking about them publicly, to show people that it is possible, and to take some leadership on this. So thanks, Kirby, for your interest. Question from Roger, and this is maybe a more rhetorical one, hard to answer, but wasting $10 billion on the Site C dam, as we found out on Friday. The government is committed to carrying out this old school mega hydro project and flooding almost 100 square kilometers of the piece. How do you stop the waste on projects like Site C and reallocate those billions of dollars towards things like retrofits, heat pumps, new technology? What's the pathway there that you see?
neither of us wants to take this. I mean, I think this is how we opened the conversation here. And Kai, you've alluded to it a few times that, you know, Friday was a hard day when we saw that a lot of, you know, hard work and good thinking, and we see the government making a choice that we don't see as the right one for the future of this province or for the Indigenous communities in those places, or, you know, really one that shuts the door on so many of these more low impact and healthier ways to empower communities to produce their own energy. So it was a super disappointing decision. And I think that is one of the reasons that we are looking at this local level of action, where we can in some ways short circuit, you know, bad provincial and federal government decisions, and, you know, trickle up from, you know, if we take over, if we do this across the board in local and communities and homes, we're doing it, right? We're doing it in the absence of or despite bad decision making from the provincial government. I'll let Dave weigh in too. Kai, you have your own thoughts too. Like, we could go on. We can talk a lot about Site C and the realities of a majority government that has just doubled down on a project like this and seems pretty keen to double down on frack gas and LNG in this province too. And that is a real power building exercise that we as a movement need to wrestle with in the next year or two, building out towards, you know, a 4-year cycle of where we're looking to get emissions under control and the next provincial election.
I'll echo Alexandra's assessment that the best solutions are local. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have an energy auditor on this webinar series who's going to show us exactly how many efficiency opportunities are available in the retrofit landscape. And as Kirby mentioned, you know, if you're building a new house, you don't have to worry about pulling old things out and putting new things in. All the new things that you can put in now, you can generate all the power you need in your own home and protect yourself from the bad decisions that the government is making, being stuck in the old utility model. The future of electricity is distributed and local. There's just no doubt about it. So local efficiency is the path forward. It's how we get around the impacts of Site C. Those are my reflections, and Kai, I'm sure you probably have one or two as well.
Well, I'll just say that the most powerful argument against Site C is treaty rights. The West Moberly First Nation has a court case coming up next year challenging this project's approval on the grounds that it obviously violates the spirit and letter of Treaty 8 and flooding, irreversibly destroying 94 square kilometers of their territory is not in alignment with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Whatever debate we want to have about the power that may or may not ever be wrung from that dam. And so if you want to stop Site C, I would say the most immediate thing you can do today is donate to the West Moberly court case. And there's a fundraise link at our Raven Trust. I was going to say our allies, our friends, Raven Trust have a fundraiser for West Moberly, and we can post that link in the chat as well. Longer term, you know, if this government is determined to build this dinosaur mega dam, the question then becomes for me, does this power go towards extracting more fossil fuels, or does it go towards switching more municipalities, more buildings, more vehicles, especially in Northeast BC, off of fossil fuels? Is that electricity going to be used to electrify the economy, or is it going to be used to double down on fracking and to subsidize foreign companies that want to expand the fossil fuel industry? And that is a political fight that we have yet to tackle, because the dam, if built, wouldn't be coming online until 2025, long after the next provincial election. So we have some time to build power between now and then. I know it's 1 o'clock, and I recognize that people have lives to live. So if you need to wrap up and head off, we'll say goodbye. Thank you for your time. However, we'll stay on for another 5 minutes, I think, just to answer a few more questions, if Alexandra and Dave are game. I did want to pause for a moment just to look at the survey results from the second survey we ran, which was around burning natural gas in our homes. Jamie, if you're able to bring up the results from that. If not, oh, we've got it here. There we go. Okay, so 100 people on this call, and the majority are getting a gas bill from probably Fortis. And some of us as well mentioned propane as a backup in power outages. And, propane is a byproduct of the fracking industry, but it's still a fossil fuel, and it's still not very good for our health to burn indoors. So yeah, many rural communities are using quite a bit of propane as well. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. I mean, I'm going to take the glass half full approach and say, yeah, it sucks that our kids are breathing nitrous oxide, but there's a lot of opportunity there just within our own community to start thinking about this in a different way. And of course, it connects to the issue of fracking. All of the gas that we're burning in our homes in order to cook food and keep the house warm is at this point coming from fracking in Northeast BC and in Alberta. And so, if you care about the poisoning of groundwater, about fetal health defects, if you care about all of the issues around treaty rights in the area of the province where the fracking is happening, and the subsidies that the government is giving to these foreign companies, one way, small as it is, to take a gesture in the right direction is to opt out of that and stop burning that gas in your home. So that's great. I did want to bring up the next poll result just around local power teams, just to get a sense of the energy in the room around working at the municipal level or the regional level. And it looks like we've got 34 people. Oh, more than that, 60 people who are, yeah, open to the idea of working with their neighbors around scaling up decarbonization efforts in their parts of the province. So that's fantastic. That's a bunch of new folks for our volunteers to get in touch with after this call. And thank you so much for being willing, after a year of COVID, to start thinking about getting out of the house and working safely together with our neighbors on these larger scale projects. So we'll take a few more questions and then we'll let folks get back to their lives. There's an interesting one from Fuad, who asks about solar for high rises in Vancouver. So alternative energy, how viable is it for office buildings and condo towers in a big city like Vancouver? Or are there other options that make more sense at that kind of scale? Dave or Alexandra, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. No, the short answer is no. Solar is not a viable energy source for a 13-story high-rise. So those are the energy challenges that we're facing as a society. And Kai mentioned that there's a decision to be made with, if we go ahead with something like Site C, what's it going to power? Is it going to power the transition to the electrification of everything, or is it going to power an increase in fracking? And that's where citizens have to weigh in. But yeah, there's no chance that solar can power a building like that. We'd be looking at a district energy plant of some type, possibly powered by hydrogen in the future. Nuclear, of course, is always an option for our larger cities. So we will need denser energy sources for highly populated, dense urban environments.
We could have the debate over nuclear, and that would take more than a 1-hour standalone webinar. But I did want to say that the less energy that a building needs in the first place, the more possible it is to tackle that challenge. And so Alexandra had this slide earlier of the Sanok housing development in Vancouver. This is a project envisioned by and being brought to life by the Squamish Nation on a sliver of reserve land near the Burrard Bridge in Vancouver. And it's envisioned as like the largest Canada. And they're able to set those standards, and they're able to evade some of the municipal regulations around, for example, the number of parking stalls in the basement, because they're a sovereign Indigenous nation and they're not following these antiquated building codes that require a parking stall, and all the concrete that you have to pour underground for every single unit in the high rise. And so it's a very exciting project. If you haven't heard about the Sanok project, there's great write-ups in the Globe and Mail and Vancouver Daily Buzz lately, just talking about the vision for this. And yeah, as we think about the built environment and about housing people in an affordable and dignified way in our cities, we need to be putting pressure on municipalities around changing the building standards so that those homes are using as little energy as possible to begin with. And it's really great to see people like the Squamish Nation leading the way on that. We've got a number of other questions here. I haven't seen a lot of folks upvoting these, so I'm just going to scroll down and and have a look, and we'll pick a couple out of the hat, and then we'll have to wrap it up and let people get on with their Wednesday. So what have we got here? Any in here that you want to take, Dave or Alexandra, if you look at the Q&A panel? Eric offers not a question, but a point of view, saying the current cost of capturing carbon, pulling it out of the air by mechanical means, is about $200 a ton. So Eric suggests thinking of a $50 a ton carbon tax, almost like a $150 a ton subsidy on carbon that's going into the atmosphere. That's an interesting point of view, Eric. Thank you for that comment. Some comments around renewable natural gas instead of fossil fuel gas. There are a few companies starting to offer alternatives around renewable natural gas. There's some talk of hydrogen in the future. I don't know, Dave or Alexandra, did you want to tackle any of these questions around sort of swapping out one form of gas for another? There's a few small scale proposals we've started to see in BC around renewable biodiesel, for example, renewable natural gas. Is that something that's viable at a large scale?
I can take a stab at it. I mean, I think the definition of efficiency is when you're able to realize a greater good than what you had before. And in our cities, we've got these huge waste facilities that are either compost facilities or trash or human waste, and all of them produce maybe what people would refer to as biogas. And if we're using, and that gas is venting into the atmosphere regardless. So obviously the first question would be like, we do need to change our whole waste stream structures to eliminate how all the emissions they create. Until we get to that point, extracting the gas from a waste facility and using it in place of fracked gas is a more efficient approach.
Yeah, I would just say there's a need for caution around some of these proposals for like bioenergy and biogas and living in northern BC. I can say that if those policies are not designed very carefully, they result in forests of old growth trees being clear cut in order to make pellets for power plants overseas. And we're dealing with that right now. That is not the world I want to live in. That's not the renewable energy future that we are advocating for. And so just beware of especially industry groups promoting sort of magical solutions that allow you to leave everything the way it is and, you know, just substitute, you know, one form of fossil fuel for perhaps an even more destructive source of energy. And so, yes, there's great promise in some of these technologies, but I think we need to remember the basics, which is that overall our society needs to be using less energy. We're extremely energy inefficient. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit just in terms of efficiency and insulation, and you know, electrification, getting off of fossil fuels and finding ways to power our economy and run our lives, get people and goods around without burning anything at all. We know we have the technology. We're very, very close in BC, and although the history of dam development in BC is a tragic one, we have the legacy of these reservoirs, which do allow us to shunt huge amounts of power around the grid at different times of day, which puts us in a really good position as far as provinces and states in North America to electrify our economy. And so I would just encourage people to keep a healthy skepticism around sort of magical tech solutions, keep an eye on the basics, and remember that we are trying to build a better world, not just sort of substitute one corporation for another or keep everything the way it is and all of the power structures in our lives the way they are while just substituting one source of energy for another. Any final words from you, Alexandra or Dave, before we let people go? If not, we can plug the webinars coming up in the next few weeks, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
I'll just leave it with the, you know, my thoughts are similar to yours. And the way I often think about that is commuting, right? Like, do we want to spend 2 hours of our day in a metal box on our own, going to and from a job at an hour away? And that to me makes it real when we talk about we need to redesign our lives and our societies and the way we plan and build where we live in a way that not only reduces our carbon footprint and not only helps us like continue to live in a habitable way on this planet, but makes our lives more beautiful, more fun, more sustainable in our individual lives. And to me, that metaphor of like the 12-lane highway and the metal box is a way to really think about like, do we just swap out fuels? Do we just swap out electric cars for gas cars, or do we think in a bigger picture about the kind of world we want to leave for our kids? And we need to do both because we need to do it quick, and that's why the switching and the swapping is important. But yeah, eyes on the big picture prize is what gives me hope and what keeps me going.
And I'm really excited about the webinar series ahead. You alluded to the idea of literacy around this. It's a big challenge, right? We're at 67 million tons and rising in BC. Like, what does that mean? We want to at least get to half of that by 2030. So IPCC is asking us to do more, and Dogwood's got a goal of getting to like 30 million tons by 2025. So, I mean, we have ambitious goals ahead of us. These webinars will help us put some of the solutions and match them up with the numbers that we're facing. So really looking forward to it.
So coming up in the next few weeks, we can confirm next week, Alexandra is going to be leading a workshop about all the ways that you can support grassroots resistance to Trans Mountain. As we mentioned at the top of the hour today, Indigenous youth are facing off with police in Vancouver over the imprisonment of Stacy Gallagher, a guy who was quite literally leading a prayer outside of an unwelcome and destructive fossil fuel project in the Lower Mainland, and is being imprisoned by the Crown as a result. So we'll be talking about that next week with Alexandra. The following week, we have an exciting webinar with an investigative journalist from Mother Jones magazine in the US, who's going to be talking about all the dirty tricks that the gas companies have been using to foil municipal climate action and to suppress medical research around the health dangers of burning natural gas in our homes. Following that, we're going to have Ryder from Cumberland, who's a certified home energy advisor who does the home energy audits that people do before they renovate their home, and he's going to walk us through the nitty gritty. So sleeves rolled up around retrofitting a home to make it carbon free in BC. And the week after that, we're going to have Dr. Melissa Lem, who is a family physician, and she has a rural practice in BC as well. And she's going to be talking about the hidden health effects of natural gas, both burning it in our homes, but also fracking, the extraction process, and the health effects of climate change that we may not have thought about. So she'll be here from the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, talking about your health, your family's health, and their Switch It Up campaign, which CAPE is running to help get natural gas out of homes in BC. And in the weeks following that, we can confirm by email as we get confirmation from the guests, but we're planning to have folks who've done some of their own installations and retrofits, a policy expert talking about PACE, that climate action financing program we talked about earlier. We'd like to talk to some farmers about local food, and that's another big chunk of our emissions, is just the embodied carbon in our grocery stores, and how we can support farmers who are fighting the climate crisis on the front lines, and also eat in season and keep our families healthy. Even in the winter up here is a challenge. I've been eating a lot of cabbage, but it's not a bad thing. My ancestors survived on rice and fish and cabbage. So we're going to leave it there for now. Thank you so much to folks who tuned in today. We're going to send you a YouTube link so you can review any sections you want to look at again from the webinar, and we'll send out those handouts that we did mention earlier in the agenda, which will help you start to think through your own decarbonization journey at the household level. If we didn't get to your question, we will include an email link. If you have something specific that we can answer, we'll send that to you as well, and we'll stay in touch this week and help you get an answer to that. And if you expressed an interest in volunteering for a local power team, an organizer will be in touch to connect you with folks working in your part of BC around scaling up decarbonization at the municipal level. So thank you so much to everybody for tuning in, and thank you for the extra time, Dave and Alexandra. We'll leave it there for now, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody.